Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about troubleshooting your professional learning communities. I am Heather Peltier with Education Foundations. I am a former teacher turned literacy coach turned administrator at the district level and then at the State Department of Education level. I supervise assessment for the Tennessee Department of Education and now love working with schools to support them on some ways that they can really use their data strategically and for high impact with their students and help their teachers do the same.
And I'm Leah Torres, and I started out being math science and then moved into math science coaching. And then at the district level, working with assessments and data and to help schools and the districts really understand what their data was telling them and how to use it effectively, especially since things really changed with COVID. And so how do you use data, or how do we look for different data sources when you don't have a lot of data? So those were different things that we had started doing recently.
All right. So today we're going to be covering three things. So the first is common causes of challenges with PLCs. And then we're going to go over some real life examples. So what these might look like when you are experiencing problems with your PLCs, what that might look like. And then we'll talk about targeting possible solutions depending on what kind of challenges your PLC is facing. And then we'll share with you some options for supporting your PLC. So if this is something that your school has been struggling with. There are a couple common causes as we work with schools that we find kind of universally across the PLCs that are having some trouble, maybe not functioning. And the first might be that your school may be following a PLC formula that is just not working for your school. And this happens a lot of times because there are some larger vendors and they have maybe some older or some more outdated systems for PLCs that might have worked before COVID, might have worked before there was this massive teacher shortage and we experienced a lot of teacher turnover. And now it's just not really working for today's schools. It's not a great fit. And so trying to make your school's PLC fit into that box might be one of the causes of the problems. You may be introducing PLCs to the first time for your school or for certain grade levels or teams. You might have a large population of new or alternatively certified teachers. We know that especially in this post-COVID era, because there's such a teacher shortage, this is one of the big challenges that schools are facing is a relatively new teaching staff. And a lot of times teachers who've not been traditionally certified. And so they may not have any training whatsoever on how to look at their student data, how to plan together, how to talk together about students and their student learning. There might be teachers who don't work well together, and we'll talk in our case studies about some more examples of what that might look like and why that is, because it's not always personality problems. There are often some other things going on. Could be overwhelmed teachers with just a lot on their plate, and they're getting stressed, they're getting burnt out. I know the latest thing that we've been seeing in the news recently is there are certain districts that are moving to 4-day week in an attempt to try to retain teachers because teachers are just really getting maxed out. You might also have classes without teachers, so classes with long-term substitutes or that are covered by other teachers or by instructional coaches. And those classes then might not have adequate representation within the PLC. So those students' learning might not be getting talked about or might not be getting talked about in the same way as the learning of the students who do have those full-time classes. And then finally, the last most frequent cause that we see is insufficient support and scaffolding. So PLCs that are introduced and there are some supports in place and there's some time schedule. Maybe the teachers attended the PLC conference or some school leaders attended the PLC conference. Maybe everyone has read a book together. There's some sort of training and support, but it's not sufficient to really get them from where they are to where they need to be as a really high functioning PLC team. So Leah, I'm going to let you talk about what this looks like.
Sure. So one thing that has happened over the years, but may cause a lot more issues now with the amount of alternative certification teachers, is that a grade level or a team that all teach the same content area may decide to divide and conquer. So they'll say, okay, if it's a grade level and they're self-contained, well, I'll plan the math and you plan the science and you plan the writing and you plan the reading, and we will all share that information. And then from there, the teachers feel like they are not as overwhelmed because they are not doing all of the plans. And yet when all of them start sharing their plans with each other, there's a real disconnect because of the way the students have been placed and what students are placed with certain teachers, that a lesson that might go really well with a certain group of students may not go as well with us ELL students, English language learners, or students with special needs, or even gifted students. There may not be enrichment for those students, or students with behavior or attendance issues. And so when the teachers get these plans back, they will implement them, but we've done walks where you can really see that teacher did not write this plan and is trying to implement these plans for the day. And it's just not having the same implementation as the teacher who designed the plan with their class in mind and the strategies that they normally use, or the engagement strategies or the AVID strategies. And so this can really cause problems on grade levels when teachers are trying to cut back on the amount of work that they are doing, and then it's not implementing well in the class. And then there's this disconnect, and then they get frustrated and they're not sure why it's not going as smoothly as it should go, and why one classroom looks better than another classroom. So some ways to troubleshoot this is sitting down with the teachers and really having them look at their own students and their class and their demographic data and their discipline data and all of these other data sources other than assessment data, and say, okay, what does your class need? What does this lesson look like? And how do we make this lesson fit your class instead of fitting another class and you trying to implement it? Because taking that away from the teachers and saying, you all have to do your individual plans and you all have to sit together can be really discouraging and feel really overwhelming to them. So trying to find ways to make this work. And another thing that we were able to do was allow the teachers to observe each other so they can see what the lesson looks like if it's implemented correctly. And then if it's not implemented correctly, what did the teacher do who wrote it and what was the intention behind it? And so that way they can start seeing how that teacher's flow goes with the students in the classroom. What engagement strategies does that teacher use on a regular basis? So when they get the plans, they're able to understand, okay, that this teacher had that in mind. And so this is the way this plan is written instead of just getting the plans. Also having a list of elements that can be used for lesson plans. Now, I know some districts don't even use lesson plans anymore, and some schools don't use lesson plans anymore. So it might be a little bit trickier, but having some sort of system set up that they can see each other's work and see each other's students. And then that way they can kind of have an understanding for what they need to do to adapt these lessons to fit their classroom. So those are different things that keep in mind instead of just saying, okay, everybody's going to sit down together and you're all going to plan together and you're all going to write these plans for 5 different subjects together. That is not going to be realistic in some cases.
And that is part of what we were talking about earlier with that support and scaffolding. And so if this is the case where you see this happening, then this is definitely an area where you can lend them some additional support. You can provide them some additional scaffolding, and that can really take them to where you want them to be as a PLC.
So another thing that might be happening is that your teachers are not working together. And sometimes teachers don't get along with each other for various reasons, or they just don't feel like they have a lot in common with each other. So it's hard for them to just sit down and plan together and work together. This could be where they're just at different spots in their career, and an older teacher may have a certain way of doing things, and the younger teachers have a different way of doing things. And it's just sometimes difficult for them to sit down and find a common ground with each other. And so sometimes it takes taking a step back and having an individual conversation as a coach with the different teachers. Okay. What is the problem? What is the hang up? Are you not being able to meet because you don't have common planning? Are you not being able to meet because there are other meetings that are getting involved? Is there inconsistent leadership? You're not really sure what to do when you get together. Sometimes they're not sure how to plan or how to read the data, or they feel embarrassed by their data if you don't have a culture in your school to be looking at that data in a safe environment. And so there just may be some resistance to that. And the next thing that I would definitely suggest is sitting down with them, taking a step back, going really slow, and really starting to introduce something simple like a common assessment. What are 5 questions that everybody can give on an assessment together? It doesn't have to be the whole test. 5 questions on grade level that we can come back and discuss. And that's a really easy way to set teachers up for success, PLCs up for success, and having them start using the PLC model. It's also really going to create a safe culture for them to talk about the data and talk about what they did to teach the students that information on the common assessment. What was the depth of the standard for that assessment? But introducing something for them to help is going to be key, instead of just having everybody sit down and say, okay, now you're working together, you all teach 4th grade, but sit down, and they're at different places in their life, or they're new to teaching and they're not really sure what to do, or they're getting ready to retirement and this isn't, they're moving on to other things now kind of in their mind. We've seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of older teachers really get more and more disconnected because they've been doing it for a while and they are ready to move on with their new plans in retirement. And, they don't want to sit down and plan anymore, and they don't want to keep talking and having these conversations. They've been doing this for 20 years. They're done. So there's different places and different levels that you can really start working with your PLCs and your teachers as they go.
And I will emphasize, really, those common assessments are so important, I think, for 2 reasons. And the first is, whenever teachers are getting together and they're talking about their student data, if they're not doing common assessments in their classrooms that are really targeted at the standards, then they might think that they're assessing in the same way. And they might say, oh, we've all assessed the standards, so let's talk about how our kids did. But maybe, one teacher likes essay questions and one likes multiple choice, and another one's got some short answer, or maybe they're all multiple choice, but they're just varying levels of difficulty. So it's really hard to have everyone on the same page and to have the conversations that are going to lead you down the right path, because the data that you're basing those assumptions on is common data. It's really hard to do that whenever you have really differing assessments. The other reason that common assessments are really good, and as Leah said, it can just be 5 questions when then maybe you're giving a 20-question test and only 5 of these are the same, but then we can come together and look at how all of our kids did on these 5 questions, because most schools, or many schools at least, have benchmark testing. And so you might have, the MAP assessment or iReady or something else. But one of the things that we've heard from some of the schools we've worked with is that teachers can get intimidated in talking about their data, their benchmark data, because there's sometimes that fear in their minds that maybe this can become evaluative. Whereas when it's a teacher developed assessment, it's my own quiz or my own test, that pressure is gone. And so it gives them a lower stakes environment in which to really have this common ground and talk about how the kids are doing. It takes the fear away, the evaluation away, and focuses more on, let's get curious about what our data is telling us.
So this has been one of the newest problems that I think we've all seen across the board is there are teacher shortages. There are a lot more substitutes covering classes. There's a lot of paraprofessionals covering classes. A lot of the instructional coaches around the country have had to move back to at least teaching part-time or full-time in the class, plus doing their instructional roles. And this can be really problemsome for a PLC because you can have 5 teachers on a grade level and 2 of those teachers being paraprofessionals covering classes, or coach and a paraprofessional, or coach and a sub covering a class. And this causes a problem because those students are now left out of the data set possibly. And those students who have the substitute aren't able to access the curriculum because that substitute may not be meeting with the PLC, or that paraprofessional may have other responsibilities. So they're not meeting with the PLCs when they meet. So you have this whole section of students at time who are really left out of the conversation and left out of the data set. And their lessons may not be the same. They might not be at the same spot in the curriculum. They may not be having the same level of common assessments or even assessments. They just may be textbook assessments because that's the easiest for the substitute or the paraprofessional to give the students. And so this is something that you could have a functioning PLC for the teachers, and then you have this whole subset of students that are not involved in the conversation. And it's really being mindful of this and who is responsible for that data and who is responsible for monitoring those students and monitoring the students' growth, monitoring the students' success on those grade level standards. Is it the coach? Is there an assistant principal? Is there a principal who's really looking at that data and including that data in the PLCs? Sometimes, if it's possible, you can have a long-term sub or the paraprofessional meet with the PLCs and get the lesson plans from the PLC lead or from the department chair and have them involved in the conversation. A coach or grade level chair and be connected to that student data and being able to pull that student data is key, because you could think that everybody on that grade level is moving along nicely. And then all of a sudden you take a benchmark or a state assessment and you realize that 18 to 20 students did not score like the rest of the students, and it's almost too late. And then what happens is those students move up to the next grade level the next year or the next course. If they've had a sub all year and nobody's monitoring it, do we know how those students did other than a gradebook grade, which could be inflated, or who's even grading that work? And so it will ensure that classes without full-time teachers are still part of the discussion and incorporating them into whatever intervention time is going on, and is anybody watching so those students do get their needs met at that grade level is really key. And it's really been a struggle with the amount of turnover in some places. You fill a spot and then you lose a spot, and then you fill a spot and then you lose a spot. And it's just, I understand that it's a real moving target, but it's important that we keep an eye on them for vertical alignment as well.
And we've worked with schools across the nation and different types, ranging from public schools, charter schools, independent schools. And we're seeing this across the board. And we're seeing coaching positions getting moved into the classrooms temporarily to cover these types of situations. And so this really is a big one, I think, for PLCs and their success.
And so this one with the professional development and what is happening in professional development, and what does the PLC actually look like, and what is the expectation for the PLC? Because teachers if they're not getting the right professional development or not having the right conversations in that professional development, it will really be a disconnect. And then at times the disconnect turns into almost like discontentment that can just cause more problems. Well, we had to go to this professional development, or we had this conversation, but it's really not helping me in my classroom, and it's really not helping my team out. And so then it just becomes a place where teachers can get more frustrated with the PLC process and then not want to be part of the PLC process. So having a PLC lead to speak with administration or coach along with the PLC could be key at each grade levels. And that's something that with the structure of coaches, we don't oftentimes have a PLC lead because we think the coaches are going to be responsible for that. But really, somebody at that grade level needs to be the champion for the needs of that grade level. And telling the coach or the administrator, my PLC needs this help, or my PLC is struggling with common assessments. We really need some insight or some coaching on how to build a common assessment. Or I have a group of teachers who are struggling with scaffolds for ESE students. We really need help in understanding how we help these students access grade level work while teaching on grade level. That's a struggle. We have a lot of new teachers. We don't understand how to do this. Can somebody come in and help us? And it's going to be very specific to the needs of the grade level. It's not going to be a one size fits all. And it really needs to be embedded in that student data to identify, okay, these are where the students are struggling. How do we help the teachers help the students access that on grade level work? Is there prior assessments or standards that they need help with? Okay, let's look at those. Let's look at student progression. But this is something that a coach or an administrator really needs to have a conversation with somebody in that PLC, or a conversation with that entire PLC, to really be able to understand the needs of that grade level or that department. Otherwise, it can be a place where the coach comes in and isn't scaffolding to the PLC, and then the PLC just gets more and more frustrated, and then they don't want to work together and they don't really know what to do next.
So in those really cohesive PLCs, you will always see that close connection between what's happening in the PLC and what the needs of the teachers are, whether those are related to a technical function of the PLC, like data analysis or building common assessments, or whether they're related to something instructional, like the example that Leah gave. They've got students with disabilities and they're really struggling in this one area. So how do we teach them within that inclusion classroom and still help them to access those grade level text? So when your PLC is functioning really well, all of those things are working together. So that was our training. These are we are education foundations, and these are things that we have been working with for years with schools and teams and teachers and coaches and administrators. It's something that we are passionate about. We love working with schools to help them use data in a way that is really going to benefit their students and drive that learning. And so if this is something that you have been wrestling with, if any of these components that we've been talking about have really resonated with you, or are ringing a bell and saying, hey, I think this is going on, or maybe these two things are going on with my team, and do you want some more support, some individualized support, you have two options. We can stay on after this, and we'll be happy to talk through with any of you. So we're going to hang out and answer any questions. And the other option is you can go to our website, and there's a link there under our services where you'll have the opportunity to set up a completely free call with us. And we will just talk through what is going on at your site and see if there are some ways that we can plug in and lend you any support. That is the first way that we can support. So it's a very individualized support where we work with you one-on-one. And that comes about always as a result of that completely free consultation because it is individualized. We're a smaller company. Our professional development is not canned, and we have experience in all of these areas. And this is really what we're passionate about. So it's relevant to your school, to what's happening today in this post-pandemic era. The other way that we can support is through, we also offer a monthly membership called Data Savvy Coaching. And that is, it's like an online course where you get live biweekly professional development. We also have group coaching, ask us any sessions. So we alternate weeks and have one of each. And as part of that membership, you get access to the resource library. We have training videos and resources that you can plug and play with your faculty on high impact data use strategy. There are on-demand trainings, and there's a private community and forum. So you can access all of that at educationfoundationsllc.com/our services. And we also have created for you, as part of this presentation, a resource, which is a reflection guide that accompanies this. And so if you go to our website and click on the supplemental resources from webinars, then you will be able to see a reflection guide. And that reflection guide is focused on helping you troubleshoot your PLCs and really think through what is going on at your school. So thank you all for joining us today. We are Education Foundations. We're so happy that you took the time to be with us. And as we said, we're going to hang out and answer any questions. So stay on the line if you want to talk.